Hi, my name is Graham. I'm with Accessible Intelligence, and we are very excited to be selected to pitch as part of the final round of presentations for the Innovation in Fundraising Challenge. And we hope you'll join us. We hope you'll be there. We're going to talk about the Accessible Intelligence platform, which is truly groundbreaking. It's technology that leverages the power of machine learning, a discipline of artificial intelligence, to help nonprofits supercharge their fundraising. It's built around specific use cases like encouraging one-time donors to become monthly donors, or if you're an advocacy organization, convincing activists to become donors. And the results really are quite amazing. We launched with the Rainforest Action Network, and during the pitch session, we're going to be talking about the outcomes that they achieved with the technology. The underlying technology itself will be presented along with information about the return on investment, as well as the interface itself. So we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday and talking about all of this amazing new innovation. My name is Graham Covington. I'm the founder and CEO of Accessible Intelligence, and with me is Gordon Walsh, who's our chief data scientist. And he's here obviously as part of the pitch team to answer any technical questions you might have. I'm going to go through a short presentation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is we actually deliver, I guess, as an output at Accessible Intelligence, talk a little bit in sort of understandable terms about machine learning, which is the underlying data science behind the product, go through some of the screens of the actual tool itself, and then more specifically talk at the end about a case study that we did with our launch client, the Rainforest Action Network. So that's my plan over the next few minutes. And I'm not going to try and skip through things, but I'm supposed to limit this, I think, to about 5 minutes. So we're going to go fairly quickly. So Accessible Intelligence, what we deliver is personalized email marketing streams to supporters of nonprofit organizations. And those marketing streams are constructed to specifically try and achieve a fundraising outcome, more broadly an engagement outcome. So our entire product is built around the idea that nonprofits are trying to solve problems, which is what Accessible Intelligence is all about. And the problems could be, for example, trying to convince a one-time donor to become a monthly donor, or if you're an advocacy organization, trying to convince an activist to become a donor, a first-time donor, or potentially even just increasing the length of retention. So our product is built around what we call use cases. And again, the actual output is a marketing stream intended to encourage your supporters to achieve that outcome. In terms of what Accessible Intelligence does differently than what you may currently be doing as part of your regular marketing communications, let's just go through quickly what typically happens. Obviously, most organizations do some form of segmentation. That's typically done manually. You might try and look for people with certain donation histories, or it could even be demographic information that you have, or levels of engagement with email, etc. So you create these segments to try and put people together into clusters that are similar so that you can, again, customize your messaging. You then obviously focus on your storytelling and your messaging around your campaigns. And then, normally most organizations will test those messages and then send out the communication, the email communication. So what do we do at Accessible Intelligence? We found that the actual process of segmentation, so clustering supporters into sort of similar groups, is done most effectively using machine learning, which is this discipline of artificial intelligence that underlies our technology. The content that you actually send to individual supporters, again, to achieve a specific fundraising outcome, like upgrading a one-time donor, is really where you're doing most of the work, because it's your story, it's your message. You're the experts at creating that content. Accessible Intelligence provides some direction in terms of requirements that the content needs to have for people within clusters. The testing really isn't necessary, because with Accessible Intelligence, it becomes learning. So the algorithms learn, and they obviously improve over time to be able to refine which messages should be sent to individuals for each use case. And then, of course, we deliver the actual communication itself. So what we do in that process of marketing communications is really look after all of the bits apart from actually telling the story. Our objective is to do the things that the maths and data science are really good at doing and leave you to essentially tell the story. I'm going to give you a quick primer now on machine learning, which is, again, the sort of the discipline of artificial intelligence, which we use, and which, quite frankly, has driven most of the progress in artificial intelligence over the last sort of 10 years. So machine learning as a discipline, without getting into too much detail, relies on data. It needs a lot of data to be able to learn. But it doesn't need just any data. It needs good quality data, and it also needs to have the right data, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. So data is at the heart of any machine learning application. You need to have a lot of data. The middle section is really the data science, where you're doing the analysis and prediction. So you're using that data for the algorithms to learn and then predict outcomes. And there are a fair number of services out there that kind of take it as far as that. So they'll look at data, they'll do some, the algorithms will actually predict outcomes and potentially give you a file of people that might be at some risk of lapsing, or people that are, most likely perhaps stop monthly giving, etc. But we have an end-to-end product. So we go from the data to the analysis and prediction to the actual delivery of the message. So we go basically from the beginning to the end. So let's talk about each of those three things very quickly. The first one is data. So we started working with our sister company, Engaging Networks, which is an engagement platform, and the nonprofits that use Engaging Networks was our starting point. And we looked at all the transactional data that organizations are producing through their email marketing campaigns. Donations, amounts of donations, numbers of emails that have been clicked, whether someone's also an activist, whether they're signing petitions, whether they're volunteers, whether they're fundraisers for you. So there's a huge amount of transactional history associated with each supporter, which is one of the data sets that's used in this prediction modeling that we do. But the one thing we realized is that actually fundraising and making a donation fundamentally is an emotive process. So people are reacting to something. And so we set about creating a database that describes the marketing content that connects to the transactions. So you don't just know that someone actually clicked through an email and made a donation, but you know actually what triggered their response to that particular email in terms of the content that encouraged them to make that donation or sign a petition or to volunteer or do whatever it is you asked them to do. So we have a group of people that are called data labelers that are in-house that literally produce a database with a very specific structure that we've spent 2 years refining to describe the marketing content, which together with transactional information has been extremely powerful in our prediction models. So once we deal with data, there's that middle box that I described, which was prediction, analysis and prediction. The first part of that is using what we call unsupervised algorithms to cluster supporters. So you take the individuals from an organization and you use these unsupervised algorithms. You actually get them to compete using something called ensemble learning. And you have the algorithms ultimately put people together into clusters with the idea that, again, you want to be able to actually do predictions based on people that are similar so that you can then obviously be more effective at producing the outcome. So in most cases, for a single use case, we will cluster supporters into anything from maybe 6 to a maximum of 10 different groups or clusters. You, as organizations, you might be doing this already as something called personas, but actually, again, the algorithms, providing they're looking at good data and the right data, are actually far more effective at doing this. They're actually non-interpretable, so you can't actually put labels on them. The maths and science are looking at transactional histories and marketing content and those data sets and actually coming up with these clusters. The only thing that you control when you're doing clustering for the unsupervised algorithms is the number of clusters you want them to create as a maximum, and also the data that they look at. So those are the only things that you actually control. Once you have the clusters, we then look within each of those clusters. So now you've put everyone together that's similar as, for example, in this case, cluster A. You look for people for this use case. And let's use the example again of a one-time donor that's you want to become a monthly donor. So now you look for everybody in cluster A that's already gone from a one-time donor to a monthly donor. And the algorithms, supervised algorithms, look within that training data for patterns to be able to predict outcomes. So now within cluster A, you take the training data, the subset of data, you use that data to be able to now produce effectively a marketing stream. And because we're actually cataloging the marketing content as a data set, the marketing stream is not just send this many emails to these individuals with this interval, but we actually can recommend the content that you need to send to everybody in cluster A for this particular use case. So this is the output. It's a marketing stream. It's the number of days that you need to send an email, or to wait to send an email. It's the content of the email. So they're kind of like mini marketing, micro marketing campaigns, essentially, to achieve a specific use case. Just to talk a little bit about some of the workflows, and this is where a lot of organizations are sort of, well, where does this fit? Because we already have a marketing communications program, so how does this work? So we don't interfere with that. The marketing communications and the marketing communications to your supporters continues. You've got your campaigns, your testing messaging, you're sending out your email marketing, etc. But at the same time, you have these very specific fundraising objectives. For example, to be consistent, one-time donor to monthly. So you're taking a subset of your supporter base and you're putting them into this marketing cycle that's been prescribed by the algorithms. When that cycle is finished, obviously not everyone will have upsold to a monthly donor, but whether they have upsold or not, they can then go back into your regular marketing communications and maybe into a different use case. So the idea is we're kind of creating like an ecosystem of your core marketing communications to your supporters being supported by all these micro marketing campaigns that are all driven by artificial intelligence. I won't go into too much detail here just for the sake of time, but basically there is a weekly process once you initiate records into a particular marketing campaign for a use case. But every week we have a process that then goes and selects and finds additional records to put automatically into these marketing streams.
Sorry, Graham, just to jump in, we have a couple of questions, if that's okay, from the group. Yep. Just to address these before we run out of time as well. So a tricky one from Mitch. He said he'd start with a challenging question: is AI not cheating? People maybe don't want to donate, and you trick them into donating. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think that, accessible intelligence and the use of this particular technology of machine learning is really not any different than any other approach that nonprofits are taking to achieve the same outcomes. You're using different technology and you're using a different approach to achieve it. But if this is cheating, then everything you're doing is cheating.
Excellent answer. Joanne also mentioned that you won an award, the Big Bang Award. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I actually got kicked off the live stream from the earlier hour, so I didn't actually see us win, but I'm told that, yeah, we did win the Big Bang, which apparently means that it's the project with the greatest potential, I think. So I don't want to miss.
Fantastic. Congratulations. There's also a question from Peter here. Sorry for jumping in with a couple of questions, but just to get them covered. Peter mentions that data is the key and an enormous amount is needed so that many INGOs have disparate systems and CRMs. How do you begin if you don't have enough data or if your data isn't clean or consistent?
So we started off Accessible Intelligence by building some core models and using algorithms, obviously, that are for an individual organization that might have 400,000 records, for example, or 500,000 records, or even 250,000 records, which is enough data to be able to actually accurately predict outcomes. What we've started to do now, though, is to look at building the aggregate models. So where you can take a number of organizations with smaller data sets And those smaller organizations, when you aggregate the transactional information, for example, with the descriptions of their marketing, you're able to actually generate enough data to be able to achieve the same outcomes. There's certain aspects of the specification of the content which we can't do because, for example, not all themes and issues are covered by organizations, even within the same vertical. So animal rights organizations or social justice or international development or whoever. But basically you build aggregate models with smaller organizations in the same area of activity. And that's the best way to do it. And that's what we're actually delivering now in the beginning of 2021, now that we've built out a couple of use cases for enterprise clients that have larger data sets where we can work with just their data. The aggregate models are what we're actually releasing at the beginning of the next year.
Fantastic, wonderful. It's scalable to smaller markets as well. Peter also mentioned he loved the idea. Did you say that the micro-marketing messaging is AI driven as well, or do humans create the messaging?
So, so the actual writing, the storytelling is done by the organization, but actually I'm going to get into now just some of the screens that describe the actual content creation process. And maybe it'll become a little bit more clear, but basically the organizations really are responsible for creating the content, but it's actually their requirements for what needs to be included in the actual emails based on what the algorithm specifies. So for example, the emotion, the reading level, subject line centricity. These are all aspects of the email content which are specified by algorithms for each cluster, for each marketing stream.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Okay, so this is a screen from, it's actually, we're just relaunching the dashboard because we've learned a lot working this year with the launch clients. So this is the content creation process where you can filter your content libraries to be able to find the content that is going to most closely match the content specified by the algorithms for a particular email in a marketing stream for a use case. And you can see at the bottom, there's a percentage match. So we automatically tell you within your content library which emails most closely match the requirement from the algorithm. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can basically start building emails from the content that you already got. If those emails, if they're historic emails, of course, they can be imported into the system. So the only thing we need is an email ID and a URL. And then they can be imported into your content library. So that's one screen. You've obviously got a full suite of editing tools to be able to actually manage the emails that you're building. There's reporting tools, of course, to be able to show you the performance by cluster within a single use case. And also the models get updated about every 6 months. So you're able to actually not just benchmark initially against your non-AI performance, but over time you can start benchmarking obviously over different versions of the model. So there's very robust reporting as well available within the tool set, both in terms of performance. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on these, but we can come back to them in the questions. What I'd like to focus on now is the Rainforest Action Network case study. So when we launched in May, this was specifically in the United States, obviously when COVID was a very much more serious than it was at the beginning of the year. And we also had the Black Lives Matter movement going on. And so that's when Rainforest Action Network launched with accessible intelligence around the use case of one-time donor to monthly. Because we launched the actual use case in May, for the purposes of the case study, we wanted to compare the outcomes that they achieved with accessible intelligence in getting people to go from a one-time donor to monthly to the same period in May when they were marketing to their supporters outside of accessible intelligence, but also back in January, because in January they had started to do a marketing campaign specifically intended to convince one-time donors to become monthly donors. So we thought to do a head-to-head comparison, we'll compare both to the same timeline in time frame in May, but also to the January period as well. What you're looking at here is essentially the 6 clusters that the algorithms produced for Rainforest Action Network for this use case. These are the marketing streams, the different colored dots represent essentially the primary ask of the email. So you can see there was a process of cultivation going on before supporters were actually asked to become a recurring donor. These are the outcomes. And the one that we obviously looked at as the most important metric was, well, how successful was AI versus Rainforest Action Network's own marketing to convince one-time donors to become monthly donors? And you can see there the difference was huge. We convinced over the course of this sort of micro-marketing campaign, 0.25% to upsell from single to monthly. In the same overlapping May period, Rainforest Action Network convinced 0.03%. And in the January period, when they had a specific marketing cycle of about the same duration, they convinced 0.04%. So AI did, accessible intelligence, managed to achieve a huge increase over what Rainforest Action Network was doing through its own regular marketing communications. But the real interesting data for me in this case study was that all engagement metrics were up. So in terms of engagement with email open rates, clicks, conversions, the average amount given for a single donation, the number of petitions that were signed. Across the board, the algorithms were far more successful at recommending specific content to send to these groups, clusters of individuals, compared to sort of their efforts at their general marketing communications. So that was the real surprise for me. It was that not just did it achieve a much better outcome in terms of the primary metric, but just overall engagement was much, much higher. And there was no bias in the selection of records. They had 40,000 people that were one-time donors with no previous history of recurring giving. They continued to market to all of them initially except 4,000. We actually put 4,000 records, again, randomized into the AI marketing cycle to achieve this outcome. Since then, we've now marketed to 15,000 and the actual percentage conversion rates have actually improved. So it's really been an amazing project to look at. This is just some of the information that goes into a bit more detail about the specifics, the numbers, and so on and so forth. So this is available on the accessibleintelligence.io website. You can download it. The case study is there. It's actually it's part of the presentation as well, as part of our project proposal for the challenge. Should I stop there for some questions? Because I see there's 12.
We've actually addressed a lot of them already. We've done it side by side, which is great. I believe, Graham, this is the end of this pitching session. As far as I know, they're 20 minutes long, but we're actually starting again from the beginning.
Okay.
And now, if there are any new attendees, if anyone who had joined the previous session has any questions that weren't addressed or would like to know more about that fascinating case study, feel free to stay and add your questions. But we'll actually start again, if that's okay. Sorry, Graham. Actually, we do have a question here. Can you give a practical example, hopefully mentioning context, where a charity before the consultancy and what was the problems they needed to overcome, so sort of the use case, and the goal, what they wanted to achieve?
Yeah, again, that's kind of the heart of what accessible intelligence does, is we take sort of generic use cases. So for example, again, upselling a one-time donor to become a monthly donor sustainer. That's one use case in our world. Convincing an activist non-donor to become a donor, that's a separate use case. Increasing retention, for example, of monthly giving, that's another one. We have another one that we're in development now, which is the activist multiplier, because we know that recurring donors actually increase or sustain their monthly giving 40% longer if they're more engaged with an advocacy organization through their advocacy program. So we've got about 30 different use cases or specific outcome metrics that nonprofits are trying to achieve generally. The first two that we've launched are activist to donor and one-time donor to sustainer. The third one, which we're working on now, is essentially the retention, donor retention. So I don't know if that answers your question, but our entire system is built around common use cases so that any organization can use the technology to achieve the outcomes for any of those use cases.
Fantastic. And you actually also answered Andrea's question about figures around retention and attrition, so that's wonderful as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we do start from the beginning again now for a new set of attendees. Is that right, for a second pitch?
I think so.
Believe.
Yeah, I know I have to do the second pitch, but I just don't know if I have to start right now. But
I think we do, if that's all right. So if anyone does have any further questions for Graham following on, or if you missed anything, he's going to run through the pitch again now. Okay. Thanks.
It's a lot to take in. Okay, thank you. My name is Graham Covington. I'm the founder and CEO of Accessible Intelligence. And this presentation is just going to go through initially just some information around what we actually do, so what we output as a technology platform. We're going to talk a little bit about the machine learning. So at the heart of our platform is machine learning, which is a discipline of artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the screens and some of the tools available in the actual platform. And then at the end, I'm going to just talk a little bit about a case study which produced some outstanding results with our launch client, the Rainforest Action Network. So to start with, what do we deliver? So Accessible Intelligence essentially outputs an email marketing stream with personalized and automated email marketing streams built around use cases with specific fundraising outcomes around in each use case. So for example, a lot of nonprofits will be trying to encourage one-time donors to become monthly donors. Or if you're an advocacy organization, you might be convincing your activists to become donors if they're not already donors. You might be trying to increase the retention of your monthly donors or just overall engagement. These are all what we call use cases. And what we do at Accessible Intelligence is we use machine learning, a discipline of artificial intelligence, to generate these marketing streams that go out to supporters with the specific intention of achieving the outcome of the use case. Again, to use the example, one-time donor to a monthly donor. So that's what we output. We output marketing streams. The idea is that we wanted to look at what nonprofits are already doing to try and achieve some of those outcomes, like, again, increasing the percentage conversion of one-time donors to monthly. And what organizations typically do is, of course, you segment your supporters. So you try to find ways in which you can identify individual supporters that are somewhat similar, because that means that you're able to customize your communication and personalize it a little bit better. So you do segmentation, you generate content for each of those segments that you want to actually market to. You'll test them typically to see which, for example, version of that content is working well with those individual segments. And then, of course, you'll generate the communication. How we're different at Accessible Intelligence is that we use machine learning, again, this discipline of artificial intelligence, to do the segmentation, what we call clustering. The algorithms look after that based on, I'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. You are really focused on the storytelling, the writing. So you're generating the content, but machine learning, the algorithms are specifying what the requirements are for aspects of that content for each cluster and for each use case. So you're still doing the writing and the content creation, but you're doing it in a way where the framework is actually built for you using the algorithms. The testing isn't really necessary because the algorithms obviously learn. So rather than doing testing and then sending out the email to the bulk of, or the remainder of your segments, what the algorithms do is they learn from the transactional history, open rates, clicks, and conversions to be able to actually improve the performance of what they're specifying you send, numbers of emails, interval, content, etc. And then, of course, we generate the communication. So just to give you a very quick overview of machine learning, it starts with data. It starts with a lot of data. Not just any data. Data is at the heart of machine learning, but it has to be good data, and it has to be the right data. So it has to be the data which is actually going to influence the accuracy of the algorithms. So that's the first box, the first requirement of any machine learning service or product. Analysis and prediction is where algorithms are being used, different types of algorithms for different purposes, to go through that data to predict outcomes. And a lot of services are out there that will go as far as that. So they might say, we'll look at your data and we're going to recommend, for example, people that might be at some risk of lapsing. So, pay attention to them, and they'll give you a list, or they'll do something else similar. Ours is more of a complete end-to-end product. So we have the data, we do the analysis and prediction, but for example, for that use case, which I'm using, which is one-time donor to monthly, we also automate the implementation of the email messaging to those supporters in order to convince them to reach that outcome. So we go from the data, prediction analysis to the full implementation, and we provide you the tool set to be able to do that. So that's the difference. What about the data? So I've got 2 slides on data. One is that we use transactional history. So we don't use demographic information. We use information about someone who's clicked through an email, made a donation, the donation amount, maybe they've signed petitions for you, volunteered, maybe they're a fundraiser for you, attended events, who knows? All of that is part of the transaction history of each of your donors. And that's one very important data set. But we realized early on that that transactional history can tell you a certain amount of information that the algorithms can use to do some useful things. But actually what we needed to have was a second data set that would allow you to understand the emotive response of each supporter to what you were sending them. So connecting the transactions to the actual content. And so we have 3 people on our team, Connor, Melis, and Joe, and they spend their days essentially describing the marketing content of the organizations using accessible intelligence. And that becomes a database used by the algorithms in conjunction with the transactional history to be able to then predict outcomes and recommend the marketing streams. So this is a central part of the platform, is being able to understand not just the transactional history, but understand what people were actually engaging with in terms of the content. The next thing, apart from the data, is that middle box that I showed you, which is analysis and prediction. And this is where we're doing it in 2 steps. The first thing we're doing is clustering. So that idea of segmenting. Algorithms, if they're being pointed to the right data and they have the right weighting for the right data, can do a much better job at clustering your supporters than you can do manually. The algorithms, again, as long as they're looking at the right data. And we do a lot of analytics to make sure that we actually point the unsupervised algorithms to create these clusters in a way which is going to be accurate in terms of prediction. And the reason that we put people together into these clusters is that within each of those clusters of similar supporters for a single use case, like one-time donor to monthly, we want to look at the ones who within, let's say the algorithms have created this cluster A, and it's 10,000 supporters, 20,000 supporters, however many you have. Within that cluster, there's a certain number that will have already been one-time donors that move to monthly. That becomes the training data. So now you're looking at that, the algorithms are looking at that transactional information and that content to be able to predict, or at least predict the most effective way of convincing everybody else in cluster A that's not yet a monthly donor, but has made a single donation, to become a monthly donor. So you first do clustering using unsupervised algorithms, and then within each cluster, you then use supervised algorithms to predict the outcomes and actually generate the marketing streams. So that's our approach, and this is what you actually end up with. So you as an organization don't have to worry about the data science, the data, or anything else. You literally now just need to populate for each email for the marketing stream for each cluster, the content specified by the algorithms. So this is ultimately the way that the product works. And I'm just going to show you one screen here to sort of help you understand a little bit how this fits. You as an organization are going through your regular marketing communications, sending out your emails to your supporters, perhaps to segments of your supporters. What we do is we say, okay, well, for a specific use case, one-time donor to monthly, again, to use the same example, we're going to take a section of your supporters and put them into this micro marketing campaign, which typically lasts about 30 days. And they're going to get the emails with the content specified by the algorithms that you've written. And at the end of that 30-day cycle, they're going to go back into your regular marketing communications, at which point they might go back into another micro-marketing campaign specified by the algorithms, or you might decide that you want to keep them in your regular marketing communications over time. So what we do is we're not replacing your overall marketing communications, because that's what's generating the data to help cluster, profile your supporters, as well as predict the outcomes and then get them into these sort of micro-marketing campaigns. So we're kind of like a mini cycle where people can kind of cycle through, again, to achieve very specific outcomes. I won't go into a huge amount of detail here, but there's a weekly process through which we select records. They go in, clients can filter out records if they choose to. So they can't change, obviously, what the algorithms are recommending, but they can say, oh, we only want to, for example, target records that are in France or Italy or the United States or Canada or wherever. So we can disqualify records through client filters, but basically there's a weekly process that continues to kind of stream individuals into these various use cases. Should I stop there, Leah, just to see if there's any questions? Or
yeah, just apologies just for a second to jump in. If anyone has any questions, we have about 5 minutes left with Graham. So just feel free to add them to the chat. But in the meantime, Graham, if you wanted to continue for a while, if it's okay, I might jump in if there are questions.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so this section is going to go quickly. I just want to show you really more the case study, but essentially these are some screens of the Accessible Intelligence dashboard. So this is where you're actually building the email content for each marketing stream, again, for each cluster, for each use case. There's some really wonderful tools available to be able to filter the content within your library. We do a match to show you that if the algorithms for a specific email have recommended a certain emotion or subject line centricity or a reading level or whatever it happens to be, we show you the emails in your library that most closely match the requirements. And then you can continue to filter based on annual events or other bits and pieces. So we've got a really nice tool for being able to actually build content. It's improved a lot over the last year as we've learned from working with especially Rainforest Action Network. And again, there's nice tools for being able to then, on an individual email, to be able to build that out, showing you, for example, which are the requirements of the algorithm which have not been met within this email, which ones have, to give you a guide essentially on what you need to do to improve the writing within the email to match what's been specified by the algorithm. There's wonderful reporting tools that are available for being able to show you the performance, not just for example, overall, but within each individual cluster, so you can see how that's working. We update the models, and so as the model changes, you'll be able to see from a benchmarking point of view. Once you start, it's going to be the core model versus your standard marketing communications. But once everyone's gone through those cycles of a particular use case, we now want to benchmark against an earlier version of the model. So we're always trying to improve performance by basically giving you the reporting for various versions of the model. And again, this is just showing you some cluster performance metrics that we have in the dashboard. We also show you, for example, this is within a marketing stream for an individual email. You might want to go in and refresh that content. And so we show you, for example, which is the best performing email content within the requirements of that specified by the algorithms. So Rainforest Action Network, again, just in the interest of time, I wanted to get through this. We launched with them in May of this year. It was a difficult time because they actually had adjusted their messaging significantly because of the Black Lives Matter movement, where they wanted to change some of their messaging. There was also the midst of COVID and the economic sort of meltdown that was happening. But that's when we launched. And so this is, for example, just showing you that there were 6 clusters. We launched with a use case to have one-time donors become monthly. There were 6 clusters generated by the algorithms. This was the marketing streams that they proposed for each cluster. And you can see there's kind of a cultivation going on within the marketing stream. So that's what the algorithms were doing. And then the different colors are essentially the primary ask of each of these emails. So from a metric point of view, what we wanted to do is compare what happened in May during the Accessible Intelligence marketing cycle for one-time donor to monthly, compare that to what Rainforest Action Network was doing also in May over the same period. But we also decided to compare it to what happened in January which was a period earlier in the year when they were doing some specific marketing to convince one-time donors to become monthly. So we thought, in fairness, we won't just do the May for May comparison. We'll do May plus January, which would be a more of a better comparison. As you can see, the primary output or metric, which was to upsell to sustainer, Accessible Intelligence generated a 0.25% upsell versus the May Rainforest Action Network marketing communications, which was 0.03. So the improvement was huge. Even compared to January, when the focus of their marketing communications was to upsell single donors to monthly, again, the difference was not quite as great, but it was still massive. So we were very happy that on the primary metric, the algorithms were really suggesting clustering and suggesting the right content to send to people based on the outcome metrics that we saw. But the really important thing for me was that all metrics were better. So email engagement, even one-time donations, the number of petitions that people were signing, across the board, all metrics improved. There was no bias in the selection of the records. So they had 40,000 records. We took a small group of just less than 4,000. They continued marketing to 36,000 records. We marketed to about 4,000 through, well, the marketing automation sent messages out to 4,000. And since May, as we've put more records into the marketing cycle, those numbers have actually improved for Accessible Intelligence. So the numbers have actually gotten better. So we were so excited by the output, and we're going to have more case studies on different use cases and also an updated version of this model at the beginning of next year. This case study is available for download off accessibleintelligence.io, which is the website. You can go in and you can access it there. It's also part of our project submission for the challenge as well. We do have aggregate models that are being built now for smaller organizations. So that's essentially how we're able to serve small organizations, is essentially by aggregating data to be able to get enough information to produce the outputs. But we're doing it basically for organizations that are within the same sort of area of focus or work, same vertical. But obviously up until now, we've launched the core models and done some adaptation on enterprise clients who have typically 250,000 records or more. So aggregate models are coming, as well as additional use cases.
Fantastic. Sorry now to jump in, Graham. We're just about to close the time, but we have a question from Suzanne, if that's all right. She's wondering, does the system analyze only digital data, or as well white mail, phone, etc., more offline data?
So for the time being, it's just the transactional information from digital. One of our plans in 2021 is to include a number of additional databases, and the first one will be offline giving, will be direct mail. It didn't really have a problem it didn't cause an issue with RAND, because Rainforest Action Network doesn't really have a very substantial direct mail program. But what we've done is we've built the framework. So now we're going to add more use cases, more data sets, and even potentially more channels. So SMS text messaging, for example, that can become another data set. Origin source can become another data set. So the more data sets that you have, the more you can produce not only outputs maybe via email marketing, but also the algorithms can now suggest, for example, mix of channels between SMS, email, direct mail.
Fantastic. Watch this space. Exciting plans for next year.
Yep, always.
Wonderful. And just to say thank you to you, Graham, for pitching that innovative idea in record time for us all. And thank you for your questions. Just to flag as well, Joanne Warner has put in the comments there, if anyone's interested, the links to download the Rainforest Action Network case study. And we will add the link to the main event now as well, if anyone would like to come back. The email addresses for Graham are there as well if you have any further questions. And thank you so much to everyone. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate your time.